You know that line Allen Ginsberg said, I saw the best minds of my generation consumed by madness in his poem How. I feel like I saw the best minds of my generation consumed by Twitter. The number of unbelievably clever people I know who have atrophied the last 10 years on utter bullshit. It's made them trivial. It's made them dumber than they are. It's made them meaner than they are. Yeah. And these are really smart people and not cruel or mean people. And I don't hold myself above that. It does this to all of us. It does it to me when I use it.
Welcome to Conversations with Peter Boghossian. Today I'm here with my friend Johann Hari, author of 3 New York Times best-selling books. And we talk about the book Stolen Focus, which is fantastic. I can't recommend it highly enough. We talk about the attention crisis and what to do about it. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Johann Hari, welcome.
Hooray.
It's good I'm so happy to be here, friend. It's good to see you.
We've known each other. I was trying to think about when we first met. It was like 8 years ago in Portland, I think.
Long time. Yeah, it was
so I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really good. We had a great dinner last night. It was a good place. And you were right. You know, I'm deaf in one ear, so the acoustics, like I think about things. You said you wanted to meet at that restaurant because of the acoustics. Like I always have to think about that stuff. So I thank you for doing that. So I want to talk about attention and maybe a little drugs, maybe drug war, maybe drug.
Bring them in. Where are they?
Drug prohibition. One of the things you write about is that we're in an attention crisis, and Johann Hari has also written about this.
And my friend loved Johann Hari, one of the most important and brilliant thinkers, and a wonderful human being as well.
Yeah, and he's moved into this new arena of social media stuff, and we'll talk about one. Well, let me just throw it out now since I'm thinking about it, but I want to talk about the attention crisis because I find that in myself as well. And I noticed when we went out to dinner the other night, no one was on their phone. Whereas in the US, you really wouldn't see people would just be on their phone, et cetera. There's a game people play where everybody puts their phone on the table during dinner, and the first one to pick it up, before the bill has to pay the whole bill. But one of the things that Haidt said, I thought it was so interesting. It's not total time on your phone. It's what you're doing on your phone. Are you like reading a book? Are you, I watch a lot of YouTube videos, jiu-jitsu YouTube videos, but are you on social media? And then, are you male? Are you female? How old are you? Okay, so I'm going to come back to that, but tell me, what is this attention crisis in which we find ourselves?
Yeah, I wrote a book about this called Stolen Focus because it's really bad. So the average office worker now focuses on only one task for less than 60 seconds. And for every one child who was identified with serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children who've been identified with that problem. And I wrote about it for a couple of reasons. One is because I could feel it happening to me, right?
Yeah,
I could feel that with each year that passed, things that are incredibly important to me, reading books, having proper long conversations like we're having now, even watching films was just getting harder and harder, right? I could still do them, but it was like running up a down escalator as you age. It was getting harder. And I could see this was happening to huge numbers of people around me. Yeah. I didn't understand why. I had a particular moment in my life with a young person that I love that I can tell you about if you like, that really horrified and sickened me. And I thought I need to understand what's happening here. Because part of me thought, well, people have always thought their attention was getting worse, right? You can read letters from monks in the 11th century where they go, our attention isn't what it used to be. I thought maybe this is just something that happens to every generation. I want to really understand this. So for Stolen Focus, I went on this big journey all over the world, from Moscow to Miami to Melbourne. I interviewed over 200 of the leading experts on attention and focus. And what I learned is actually, this is a very real crisis. We know that because there's scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better or can make it worse. And loads of the factors that can make it worse have been hugely rising in recent years. Some of them, Jonathan's absolutely right, some of them are in our technology. It's not all about technology. Some of them are things I'd never even thought about that are not related to technology that I'm sure we'll go into. There's a really big and broad range of things that are doing this to us. But crucially, your attention did not collapse, right? Your attention has been stolen from you by these big and powerful forces. When I felt my attention getting worse, I just blamed myself. I was like, where's your fucking willpower? Why aren't you strong enough? Why can't you resist this? But actually, when you really do a deep dive into the science, you see that something much bigger is going on. And it's only when we understand these bigger forces that we can begin both to defend ourselves and our kids and begin to take on these big forces that are screwing us over.
Yeah, I noticed. So you're only on Twitter half the year, right?
Yeah.
And that's an intentional thing.
I do not want people at my funeral to say, Johann spent a lot of time on Twitter, right? That is just not I don't like how I feel when I'm on Twitter.
Yeah. No sane person does, by the way.
No, literally no sane person. Yeah, I agree with you. And it's interesting, again, obviously I learned a huge amount about social media. I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley interviewing people who designed key aspects of this infrastructure we're spending so much of our lives in. So I can talk a lot about that. But for me personally, you know that line Allen Ginsberg said, I saw the best minds of my generation consumed by madness in his poem, How? I feel like I saw the best minds of my generation consumed by Twitter. The number of unbelievably clever people I know who have atrophied the last 10 years on utter bullshit. It's made them trivial. It's made them dumber than they are. It's made them meaner than they are. Yeah. And these are really smart people and not cruel or mean people. And I don't hold myself above that. It does this to all of us. It does it to me when I use it. So I actually haven't been on it for nearly a year now. Yeah. And even when I am on it, it sounds very grand, but I have an assistant. I send the social media posts to her to do. I don't log in and do it myself. I never look at it. Just because I think, I've got an apartment full of books. Loads of them I haven't read. Do I want to read the Tolstoy novel I haven't read, or do I want to read what some asshole who hasn't read my book saying a load of shit about me? Life is short, very short. We're all going to die very soon. In the meantime, do stuff that's meaningful, that makes you a smarter and kinder and better person, not stuff that makes you dumber and meaner.
Yeah, at dinner the other night, Andrew Sullivan told us that he hasn't been on it for, I think, over a year, he said, or almost, or something like that. And I asked him how he felt. He said, fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Andrew's been one of my closest friends for 20 years. Yeah. And I've never seen him happier than when he got away from all this shit, right? I think particularly if you have a sensitive personality type like Andrew does, like I have, like many people have, it's just, it's... But we also... So it's very important when we think about social media. For all of the 12 factors that I write about in Stolen Focus that are harming our attention and focus, right? I think there's two levels at which we've got to deal with them. I think of them as defense and offense. There are loads of things that we need to do to defend ourselves and our kids in our immediate personal lives. And I go through loads of them. So these things I recommended to Andrew that I think really helped him and that helped me. So I go through loads in the book, but I'll recommend just two very simple ones that everyone could do immediately. Everyone should go online and buy something called a K-Safe. It's just K-Safe. I should have brought mine along to demonstrate this. I also should have bought shares in this company before my book came out because their sales have massively gone up since I started talking about it. It's very simple. It's a plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, you turn the dial at the top, and it locks your phone away for anything between 5 minutes and a whole day, right? I use it 3 hours a day to write. I won't sit down and watch a film with my partner unless we both put our phones in the phone jail. I won't have my friends around for dinner unless everyone agrees to imprison their phones. And it's very difficult at first. But what I often say to people, it was very difficult for me at first as well, what I say to people is, think about anything you've ever achieved in your life that you're proud of, whether it's starting a business, being a good parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever it is. That thing that you're proud of required a shitload of deep focus and attention. All human achievement comes from deep attention, right? And when your ability to focus and pay attention deteriorates, the evidence is very clear. Your ability to achieve your goals deteriorates. Your ability to solve your problems deteriorates. You feel worse about yourself because you actually are less competent when your attention is worse, right? Regaining your attention is regaining your superpower. And the pleasure of what we're doing now, you're listening to me, I'm listening to you, is so much greater than whatever shitty update I would get on my phone over there from Instagram, right? So, although I wouldn't get it because it's blocked. So, get a K-Safe, install on your phone an app called Freedom, very simple app. Let's say you were addicted to Instagram or Pornhub or whatever it is. You set the app, you can sync it to your laptop at the same time and all your devices. And you can just say, do not let me go on to Instagram for the next 4 hours. You push the button. It could be any amount of time and it can be any website, or indeed it can be the entire internet. And then if you try to click on it, it just says you've been set free, go and do something else, right? So And I go through dozens of things like that we can all do, individual steps.
Yeah.
But I want to be really honest with people, because I do not feel most people who are communicating about attention to the public are leveling with people. I am passionately in favor of the individual changes that I talk about in the book that we have to do in response to all of the 12 factors that are harming our attention. And these individual changes will make a huge difference to your life, and I'm obviously passionately in favor of them.
And you do them yourself.
And I do them myself.
You don't just talk about it. You actually
I do them myself. I don't want to hold myself as some paragon. I don't do them consistently. Yeah. I have many failings when it comes to these things. But yeah, I've integrated them deeply into my life. They'll make a big difference, but they will not fully solve the problem, because this crisis didn't happen because I had bad habits or Andrew had bad habits or you had bad habits. This crisis happened because some very big and powerful forces are systematically invading our attention.
Yeah.
That might sound a bit odd or even conspiratorial, but when you actually see the evidence around it, this is what the people at the heart of that machinery themselves say. So we have to understand the mechanisms of how this is happening to us across the board. The way we eat is really affecting our ability to focus and pay attention, for example. But if we think there's loads of things we can go down, the way our offices work, the way our schools work, our kids' schools, we can go down a big list, but we need to understand these bigger forces, because we also need to go on offense against those forces. It's not just a matter of protecting ourselves, hugely important though that is. We have to take on those bigger forces, which sounds a bit fancy and wanky, but I went to places that have begun to do it, from France to New Zealand. We can talk about how, but we've got to look at both sides, defense, offense.
And we take them on. I imagine there are physical and digital ways. When you go to Joe Rogan's comedy club in Austin, I think it's called the Mothership, if memory serves me correctly. Everybody, they lock your phone away in a little case, and you can't open it. And I have to say, I love that. I love the fact that not necessarily that I wasn't on my phone, but that other people are on my phone. You know, the story you said you can get back to. I was talking to a guy. I wasn't friends with him, but I was friendly with him. This is horrific story. And he said, "Oh, geez, I'm sorry, I have to take this." I'm like, it's all good.
Where were you? What was the context?
I was in this new place where I'm living, and someone called him. I'm out of Portland, and I can't say where I live.
Sure.
But, so he took the phone call, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, wow!" And then he put it on speakerphone, and he didn't put it on speakerphone so I could hear. He put it on speakerphone so he could play a game. So he found out that his mom just died on the phone, and he's playing a game while talking to the person who's telling him on speakerphone. That was so crazy to me. Like, that is, I don't even know. That's like I don't even know. Addiction doesn't quite cover what that was, but.
That's so interesting. So and what was his facial expression? What was his?
Oh, initially when he found out, well, I didn't hear the person on the other end.
Right.
In the first part of the phone call, I only heard it when they put it on speakerphone, when he put it on speakerphone. But yeah, I mean, he was devastated, and he was like, he just took a few steps back. And then again, he's not he's a guy I'm friendly with, but I was just struck by that whole thing.
So there's a few ways of thinking about that, right? So I'm just thinking about this scenario. So one is, well, let's go from the most generous to the most ungenerous. So the most generous is
trauma. He's just traumatized.
It's trauma, and actually he's looking for a source of comfort in a very traumatic moment, right? Like you've seen the movie Don't Look Now, haven't you? The great, you fucking look, great film. You should see it. It's about, you will have seen it probably in the 70s. It's about a grieving couple who go to Venice, played by Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, and their daughter has drowned, and they're sort of haunted by this girl in a red jacket. And there's a kind of sex scene between them, and some people at the time thought, "Oh, this is really distasteful. This grieving couple fucking what a distaste." But actually, it's a form of relief in a really distressing situation. You seek out forms of comfort that may seem inappropriate. Why do we laugh at funerals, right? Because you need some kind of relief. So it could be in a context of shock. The guy is like going to some immediate form of comfort and way of not being present. In fact, one of the most effective forms of treatment for soldiers who've just been in a firefight, they used to give them like talking therapy, sit them down and talk about what you've just been through. Actually, that makes it worse. It embeds the trauma that we now know, it's well-intentioned, of course, but we now know it embeds the trauma. Actually, the single best thing you can do with soldiers who've just been in a firefight, get them to sit down and play video games for 2 days. Don't talk about it. Don't think about it. Do something else, right? Something very engaging but distracting. So I guess that's one scenario. We could be thinking the guy is just going to a kind of comfort behavior in a very shocking and traumatic experience. That's the most sympathetic reading. Obviously, I don't know the guy. I don't know if this is... So another way of thinking about it would be an addiction model that these devices, or more specifically, the apps on the device, are designed by extremely sophisticated behavioral scientists, many of whom I interviewed, are designed to compulsively hijack your behavior. I interviewed a guy called Neera Yal, who had quite a contentious interview with, who wrote a book called Hooked, who talks about, I'll give you an example of where he's coming from. He wrote a blog post, the title of which was, I believe I'm getting this verbatim, but people should check, want to get your users hooked, drive them crazy. Right, so it gives you some sense of, and to be fair to Neer, that's the whole philosophy that drives Silicon Valley when it comes to the design of these apps, right? So second model would be an addiction-based model. This guy's just been hijacked and taken over, and it's...
That's what I was thinking.
So that's the second model. Third model would be, I guess, think about Camus. What's the opening line of The Outsider? I forget the exact, well, it's differently translated into English, but it's, so the central character, Meursault, his mother dies. We discover this in the opening line, if I remember rightly, and something like, my mother died today and I did not cry, right? Huh. And we immediately clock there's something wrong with Meursault. So the alternative model is that he's a psychopath, right? He's someone has a profoundly impaired relationship to empathy and emotion.
College, but yeah,
it's fucking staggering. Funny enough, I reread it recently. It's an astonishingly great book. So yeah, I guess you've got from comfort to addiction to psychopathy are probably the three explanatory models for that. Harder to know without knowing him, but that your experience is not unique. It was an experience that has some parallels with what you're describing. I wouldn't want to overstate the parallels, but some parallels that actually made me write the book. Because for years I'd thought, my attention's getting a bit worse. This is fucking annoying.
Yeah.
But honestly, I just thought, well, the answer is obvious. There's something wrong with me and someone invented the smartphone and fucked me over. So it didn't seem to me a particularly interesting thing to write about because the answers, I had an obvious narrative about what was wrong, which I later discovered was massively oversimplified. It's not that willpower doesn't exist, it does. And it's the invention of the smartphone plays some role, but there's much more complex and interesting things going on. But the thing that made me realize I had to look into this was an experience I had. I've got a godson and who I really love. And when he was 9, he developed this super cute obsession with Elvis Presley. And it was so cute because I think he was genuinely the last person in human history to learn that impersonating Elvis was a cheesy cliche. So I think he did like a totally sincere version of Jailhouse Rock, which is properly adorable. And every night when he would get me to tuck him into bed, he got me to tell him the story of Elvis's life over and over again. Obviously, I skipped over the bit at the end where he shits himself to death on the toilet. But and one night, I mentioned Graceland, right, where Elvis lived. And I think I might even mention that people go there. And his whole face lit up and he was like, Johann, will you take me to Graceland one day? Yeah. And I was like, sure, the way you are with 9-year-olds, knowing next week he'll want to go to Legoland or whatever. And he said, no, do you really swear, do you promise one day you will take me to Graceland?
Yeah.
And I said, I absolutely promise. And I didn't think of that moment again for 10 years until just loads of things had gone to shit. So he dropped out of school when he was 15. And by the time he was 19, he spent literally, this sounds like an exaggeration, I promise you it's not, literally almost every waking hour alternating between his iPad, his iPhone, and his laptop. And his life was just this...
What was he doing? Was he reading? Was he playing video games? What was he...
Snapchat, porn, other forms of social media, YouTube. But it was like he was kind of spinning at the speed of Snapchat. Do you know what I mean? Where nothing still or serious could touch him. He's very intelligent. I remember this moment that really crystallized it for me. We were sitting in my apartment here in London, and all day I was trying to get a conversation going with him, and I just couldn't. He just, it's like it was like throwing sticks into a river that's going really fast. You could catch him for like 30 seconds and then it'd just be gone and he was whirring onto something else. And to be totally honest with you, Peter, look, I wasn't that much fucking better. right? I was staring at my own devices. And I suddenly remembered this moment all these years before. And I said to him, let's go to Graceland. And he looked at me completely blankly. He didn't remember this thing all these years, 10 years before. And I said to him, like, this is no way to live. Let's break this numbing routine. Let's go on a road trip all over the South, right? I could see his whole face lit up because he wasn't happy living like that. But I said, you've got to promise me one thing, which is that if we go, you'll leave your phone in the hotel during the day because there's no point in us traveling 3,000 miles for you to stare at your phone. And he took a beat and he really thought about it. And he said, I promise, I really want to do this. Let's do it. And I think it was literally like 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, we took off from here to New Orleans, where we went first. And a couple of weeks later, we got to the gates of Graceland. And when you get to, have you ever been to Graceland?
No.
Oh, got to go. It's amazing. But when you get to the gates of Graceland, this is even before COVID. This was 2017, I guess. There's no human being to show you around anymore. What happens is you arrive, you pay the amount, they pay you an iPad, you put in earbuds, and the iPad shows you around, right? So you have a voice and it says go left, go right. Every room you go in, the iPad tells you a story about that room. And every room you go in on the iPad, there's a picture of that room that you look at, right? So we're walking around Graceland and there's this slightly weird effect where everyone is just looking at the iPad. And I'm sort of looking at them and I get a little bit pissed off. I'm like, oh, we've traveled a long way and no one's looking at the place, right? And every now and then someone would look up and I go, oh, so there you go, person. And I realized they'd looked up to take out their phone, take a selfie, put the phone away, go back to the iPad. And we got to the jungle room. It was, that was his favorite room in Graceland. It's got loads of fake plants in it. And they've kept it how it was then. And I'll never forget them. There was this middle-aged Canadian couple next to us. And the man, the guy turned to his wife and he said, honey, this is amazing. Look, if you swipe left, you can see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right. And they were just kind of, and I thought they were kind of kidding. And I watched them and they're just swiping back and forward.
Wow.
And I leaned forward and I said, but hey, sir.
This is more amazing.
There's an old-fashioned form of swiping you could do. It's called turning your head because you realize we're in the jungle room. Yeah. You don't have to look at it on the internet. It's literally all around you.
Yeah.
And they looked at me like I was fucking nuts and backed out the room. And I turned to my godson to laugh about it. And he was standing in the corner staring at Snapchat because from the moment we landed, he literally could not stop, right? And I went up to him. I did that thing that is never a good idea with teenagers. I tried to grab the phone out of his hands. He's stronger than me. I couldn't do it. And I said, look, I know you're afraid of missing out, but this is guaranteeing that you'll miss out. You're not present at your own life. You're not showing up for the events of your own existence. This is no way to live. Yeah. And he stormed off, understandably. And I wandered around Memphis on my own that day. And I found him that night by the Heartbreak Hotel where we were staying. He was sitting, there's a huge guitar-shaped swimming pool. And I went up to him. He was looking at his phone. I went up to him and I apologized for getting so angry. And he didn't look up, but he said, I know something's really wrong and I don't know what it is. And I realized in that moment, we came away to get away from this problem of distraction, but there was nowhere to escape to. It's the air we all breathe. It was everywhere. And that's when I thought, okay, I need to understand this in a deeper way. There's something more going on here than there's something wrong with him. And there's something wrong with me that we're just lacking willpower. I need to understand the deeper structural forces that are doing this to everyone and what we can do about it.
And you give, that's an intense story. You in Stolen Focus, you give suggestions, recommendations and tips. But I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier about conspire isn't the right word, but there are forces at play. I want to ask you how we take them on. Just as a very quick aside, I remember reading an article about, do you guys have Fritos over here?
Yeah, sure.
Those little
At least one of my chins is due to Fritos. So actually, I don't know if we have them in Britain, but a fuck ton of them in the US.
Yeah. So I read this piece about it was some truly crazy amount of money it took to make a Frito. Everything, the perfect sound, the perfect taste, the crunch, the texture, everything. And it seems analogous to what you're talking about. It's not quite a conspiracy because nobody's conspiring in a sense that it's like secretive. So how do we take on these crazy powerful forces?
The analogy with food is very good. There's a very good book called The Dorito Effect. For people who want to know more about how food is designed in that way. But frankly, I was skeptical about a lot of the claims about this until I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley interviewing people who'd been at the heart of the machine. To give you an example of a guy, you should totally have him on, one of the smartest people I know, called Dr. James Williams, who's now at Oxford, but he was for a long time, worked at the heart of Google, heart of the machine. And so James had an epiphany one day. I mean, it was like most epiphanies, it was the accumulation of many moments, but the culmination of many moments. But he was speaking at a tech conference where the audience were literally the people who design the stuff your kids are using today, right? And he said to them, if there's anyone here who wants to live in the world that we're creating, please put up your hand. And nobody put up their hand. Not long afterwards, he quit and became, I would argue, the most important philosopher of attention in the world at the moment. And I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley having people explain to me what they had done and how they had done it and how we can put it right before I understood it. For example, my friend Tristan Harris, who'd worked at the heart of Google as well.
I didn't know you guys were buddies.
Oh, I love Tristan. I think he's one of the most admirable people I've ever met. What a fundamentally brave, rigorous, unbelievably clever, morally purposeful. I think he is such an important and good and admirable person. I cannot speak too highly of Tristan, but he often says, he said when testified before the Senate, you can try having self-control, but every time you do, there are 10,000 engineers on the other side of the screen working very hard to undermine your self-control, right? Which I think is a way of framing it that really helps us to understand it. So what lots of people explained to me, because I thought the problem was the existence of the technology itself, the invention of the smartphone itself, right? And it's true that poses some profound challenges. But actually, deeper, bigger and more important layer of this is the design of the specific apps, social media apps that we use, which could be designed in a completely different way. If the existence, look, the way big tech want us to frame this is, are you pro-tech or are you anti-tech, right? And if that's the framing, well, perfectly reasonably, everyone watching is going to think, well, I'm not going to give up my phones and join the Amish, right? No disrespect to any Amish who are watching. No. You are cheating if you are. But, you think, well, therefore I must be pro-tech. That's not the debate. We are all pro-tech. I'm pro-tech, you're pro-tech. Tristan, you could scarcely find a more pro-tech person. He loves it, right? That's not the question. The question is, do we want tech that is designed to enhance our lives and enhance our capabilities, or do we want tech that undermines one of our most important capabilities, attention, in order to make a couple of very, very rich people even richer? So that can all sound a bit weird, so it's worth thinking it through in a very concrete way. If you now took out your phone, please don't, and you opened... Specifically... exactly, thank God, it's hidden somewhere, right?
Somewhere, I don't know, I think on that desk over there.
Amen. But if you took it out, and you open TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any of the mainstream social media apps and begin to scroll, those companies immediately begin to make money out of you in two ways. The first way is really obvious. You see advertising.
Right.
Everyone understands that. The second way is much more important. Everything you ever do on these apps is scanned and sorted by their artificial intelligence algorithms, including your so-called private messages, to figure out who you are, what you care about, what makes you angry, what makes you sad, what makes you happy. So let's say you've ever indicated on these apps that you like, I don't know, you like Donald Trump, Bette Midler, and you just bought some diapers. Okay, it's going to figure out, if you like Donald Trump, you're probably right-wing. If you like Bette Midler and you're a man, you're probably gay. No disrespect to any straight men who like Bette Midler, I don't really believe you, but all right. And you've bought some diapers, you've probably got a baby, right?
Yeah.
If you've been on these apps for any amount of time, they know tens of thousands of things like that about you. They know far more about you than your neighbor, right? Because your neighbor doesn't read your private messages at 3 a.m., right? They know a shitload about you. And they're harvesting and learning that information for several reasons, but the most important is they're figuring out what they can feed you next to keep you scrolling.
Correct.
For a very simple...
the attention economy. Correct.
Well, for a super simple reason. Every time you open the app, they begin to make money. The longer you scroll, the more money they make. Every time you close the app, that revenue stream disappears, right? So all of the people at the heart of the machine said to me, all this AI, all these algorithms, all this genius in Silicon Valley when it's applied to social media has one goal and one goal only. How do we figure out how to get you to open the app as often as possible and scroll as long as possible? That's it, right? Just like the head of KFC, no doubt has many concerns as a human being, but in his professional capacity, all the head of KFC cares about is how often did you go to KFC this week and how big was the bucket you bought. All these companies care about is how much of your attention did we take this week, right?
Yeah.
They are machines designed to harvest your attention. Now, at first, when you hear that, or certainly for me, when I first heard that, you just think, oh, fucking hell, well, then we're trapped in the matrix, right? What can we possibly do about that? But it's really important to understand, and again, they kept explaining it to me, it took me a long time to get it. What this means is we can have all the technology we currently have, we can have all the social media we currently have, but have it designed differently according to a different set of incentives. We can have it designed not to hack and invade our attention, but to heal our attention. And if that sounds bizarre, I had to unpack it. And there's an analogy that really helped me to unpack, I think, what we need to do now. There are many things we need to do to deal with the attention crisis. This is just one of the 12 factors causing the crisis, but let's stay focused on this one. There's an analogy that you'll remember, that I remember, anyone over the age of 35 will remember, of a moment when we dealt with something very similar, very effectively as a society. So when we were kids, the only form of gasoline you could buy was leaded gasoline, right? I can remember it. I can remember the smell of it, can't you, right?
Yep, 100%.
And it was discovered that exposure to lead is really bad for people's brains and particularly bad for children's ability to focus and pay attention. And obviously, if it was in gasoline, it was in the air, because it was in the fumes, everyone was breathing in extraordinary and unprecedented amounts of lead. It was really harming kids' attention. It's actually causing a lot of disinhibition and violence. It's one of the reasons why there was a huge spike in violence in the 1970s, because the lead levels massively went up. So what happened was, by the late 70s, the science was completely undeniable on this. What happened is a group of ordinary moms, what at the time they would have called themselves housewives, banded together and said, why the fuck are we allowing this? They probably didn't say fuck, they were probably less sweary than me, but why are we allowing this, right? Why are we allowing these companies to screw up our kids' brains? And it's really important to notice what those mothers didn't say. They didn't say, so let's get rid of cars, let's ban petrol, right? Just like no one is saying, let's get rid of technology, let's get rid of our iPhones, let's have a mass amnesty for our laptops, right? It's not what any of us think. I mean, there may be some very extreme people, but virtually nobody, right? What they said is, let's deal with the specific thing that's screwing up our kids' attention and replace it with something similar that doesn't screw up our kids' attention, right? So they fought for a ban on leaded gasoline, so we would move to non-leaded gasoline. And it followed, and they took on a very powerful industry, the lead industry, right, that did not want to do this. And it followed the classic pattern of all successful political movements that was described by Mahatma Gandhi. First, they ignored them, then they laughed at them, then they fought them, then they won. As everyone watching knows, ain't no more leaded gasoline. Anyone under the age of 35 doesn't know what it is. Venezuela just became the last country in the whole world to ban leaded gasoline. Doesn't exist anymore, right? As a result, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has calculated the average American child is 3 to 5 IQ points higher than they would have been had we not banned leaded gasoline. Now, to me, that's a really great model. In addition to all the individual stuff we need to do and that we're passionately in favor of, you take on the bigger force that's doing it, you replace it with something better, right? Now, obviously, thinking about that, it was someone called Jaron Lanier, who I think you might know, the brilliant, incredibly smart technologist and Silicon Valley genius who first told me about the lead
Not
paint
personally,
analogy.
but
Yeah, great. You should interview him. He's an extraordinary man, Jaron. It was him who first raised it me. Obviously, I then began to ask loads of people, okay, what's the equivalent of the lead in the lead paint for social media?
That's what I was
right?
thinking of, yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
So Asa Raskin, who invented a key part of how loads of websites work, his dad, Jeff, invented the Apple Macintosh for Steve Jobs. Asa said to me, if you want to know what the equivalent to the lead in the lead paint is for social media, it's very simple. You have to ban the current business model. I'm thinking, what does that fucking mean, right? So it had to be unpacked for me. So there are essentially 3 ways of funding social media. So the first one is called surveillance capitalism, a phrase that comes from Professor Shoshana Zuboff, who's at Harvard, has written brilliantly about this in her book, The Rise of Surveillance Capitalism. So that's where it's where you appear to get the apps for free, right? Anyone watching, you could download TikTok now and you'd seem to get it for free.
Right.
But you pay with your attention.
Right.
It's an extraordinarily sophisticated machine designed to harvest your attention and keep you scrolling, right? So you pay with your time, with your attention. I would argue with things that we really care about, polarization and profound threats to democracy, but we can come to that. So you pay both personally and politically. That's what we have now. Has some advantages. You don't pay up front. That's a real advantage. No denying that. But I would argue the costs are, the downstream costs, and they're not so far downstream, are enormous, right? So that's the model that Aza says we should just ban. It's like lead in leaded paint, get rid of it, right? And I said to him, okay, but let's imagine we ban it. And I open Facebook the next day, would it just say, sorry, we've gone fishing?
Yeah.
He said, no, of course not. What would happen is they would move to one of the two other business models.
Pay per month or something?
Well, everyone watching will have an experience of the two alternative models, or almost everyone. The first one is subscription, right?
Right.
Everyone knows how Netflix works. You pay a certain amount, in return you get access.
Right.
Key thing to understand is all the incentives change in that model, right? At the moment, if you work at YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, any of these groups, companies, all the incentives are, how do we hack and invade Peter? How do we to keep him scrolling, right? They're not asking, what does Peter want? They don't care. You're not their customer. All these companies have customer service departments. You and me can't phone them, right? Because we're not the customer. Only advertisers can phone them. They're the customer. We are famously the product. Our attention is the product they sell to those customers, right? So, but in a subscription model, suddenly you are the customer, right? Suddenly they're not saying, how do we hack and invade Peter and his kids to keep them mindlessly scrolling all day? Suddenly they're saying, what does Peter want? Turns out Peter feels good when he can pay attention. Let's design our app to heal and enhance attention, not to undermine it. Turns out Peter feels good when he meets up with his friends offline and looks into their eyes. Okay, let's design our app to maximize face-to-face contact off the app.
But don't you still have to go on the apps to get all those experiences?
Sure, you have to go on Tinder and Hinge, but the purpose of Tinder and Hinge is not to stay forever mindlessly scrolling on Tinder and Hinge, right? The purpose is to then go on a date with a real person and meet them, right? So, of course, that's a subscription-based business model. Yeah, of course, Facebook will always want you to use Facebook to some degree. But in the same way that HBO's goal is not to get you to watch HBO 24 hours a day. HBO's goal is to produce Mayor of Easttown once every 2 years that I love so much that I'll very happily keep that monthly thing going, right? So in a subscription-based model, quality of engagement becomes the premium, not quantity of engagement, which exists under surveillance capitalism, right? So it's a completely different relationship you have. But the third model, which literally everyone watching has some experience of, is the technical term for it would be public ownership independent of government. So think of the sewers, right? Before we had sewers, we had shit in the streets, people got cholera. We're not so far from sitting here from where the very first sewer in the whole world was built. Today, you own the sewers in the city where you live, along with all the other citizens of that city. I own the sewers in the city where I live. We all pay to build and maintain the sewers together, and we own them collectively. Now, it might be that just like we want to own the sewage pipes together because we don't want to get cholera, we might want to own the information pipes together because we're getting the equivalent of cholera for our attention, and I would argue for our democracy and our ability to listen to each other and talk to each other, right?
What are the cons of that, of public ownership?
There are potentially huge ones. So the bit that's difficult to navigate, so what would the critics say? They would say you get less innovation in a publicly owned model. Probably true. They would also say, because there's less of an incentive to innovate.
Sure.
There are some democratic pressures to innovate, but it's different to market pressures to innovate. But there's a really big one, which is navigating the bit that says it's publicly owned but independent of government, right? So I would think about the most successful publicly owned institution in the world, independent of government, I would argue is the BBC, right?
Yeah.
Every British person who owns a television pays a fee to the BBC. It goes to the BBC. They get it. The BBC is owned by us and works for us. It's a deeply imperfect institution, but it is the most trusted media institution in the whole world for a reason, right? So imperfect, but give me the BBC over, many other broadcast-based models I've seen in the world, right? But even for the BBC, that navigating of the line between, okay, so it's owned by all of us, but it exists in a statutory framework set up by the government. It has a board where the government appoints people. There's always, throughout the history of the BBC, going back, whatever it is, 80 years, there's always been this difficulty of, well, are they really independent of the government? Is the government swaying the BBC? Is the BBC scared of upsetting the government? So obviously the very worst case scenario of public ownership would be government control. We can all imagine what the internet would look like if, I don't know, Jair Bolsonaro had controlled it during his years running Brazil, right? So there are real challenges. Every model contains challenges, right? Surveillance capitalism comes with a massive cost. Subscription comes with some cost. Public ownership comes with really big benefits, but potential costs. So there's risks to all of them, and different countries need to experiment with these different models. But I think the one we have now is imposing catastrophic costs on our attention, our democracy, a whole range of factors.
So two things are going through my head when we're having this conversation, and then two primary things, and then a sea of minor things. let me throw it. I'm hesitant to go down this rabbit hole, but I just want to
Sure.
get this out so it doesn't stay resonant the whole conversation. I don't even want to say their names, but I'm thinking about two people who are likely to be in the presidential. And rest assured, not only am I not happy about this, I literally know nobody who's happy about this.
Literally no one.
Well, literally no one. Yeah. No one who's happy about this runoff.
Including, by the way, probably the children of the two individuals you're mentioning, right?
Yeah, and
or
even people who like
Jesus.
one of the candidates, they want someone else. They want an actual conversation about things that matter. But I don't see, I'm just going to throw this out, I don't see either one of those individuals to be even remotely capable of handling, not even handling in terms of policy prescriptions, but of even entering this conversation or even taking this seriously or thinking about it. That's just one thing I just wanted to throw out because it has been weighing on me as we move to the election that's coming up. The other thing is I wanted to get your opinion about, I've been reading a lot of disturbing things about TikTok in particular. So what do you think about, is TikTok an instrument by the Chinese to sow dissent? Do they change the algorithms to promote people who love bin Laden and trans issues? And I've spoken to a few young people. It's not like I'm super old. Young people.
I spoke to the youth.
I spoke to them young people. I spoke to some of my daughter's friends about this, and they have said that they haven't said detrimental psychological effect, but they've said that definitely. They thought, geez, maybe am I quote unquote born in the wrong body? It's, because the algorithm. But what's your take on TikTok and banning TikTok? And you can talk about the presidential stuff if you want, but let's run with the TikTok.
Well, just about the presidential thing, I have a very short thing to say, which is Rebecca Solnit is a brilliant writer, says politicians are weather vanes. It's our job to be the weather. Yeah. And the truth is, nothing good. No, that's going too far. The vast majority of positive changes that have happened do not happen because someone at the top has an epiphany and decides to do the right thing. They happen because ordinary people band together, pressure and demand the government. So for example, to give a very obvious example, I'm gay. The world is incalculably different for gay people now compared to, it's incalculably different for a 15-year-old gay kid now compared to when I was 15, and my life is infinitely better than my gay uncle's life was, and on and on and on, right? And that did not happen because President Eisenhower one day woke up and said, let's treat these fags well, right? Or because that's not how it worked. It happened just because ordinary people, brave gay people, brave straight people, banded together and just said, you know what, let's stop treating these people like shit and let them have decent lives, right? So this change, you're 100% right, this change will not come from the top, right? It will not be an epiphany, certainly not on the part of those two individuals, neither of whom I doubt could even follow the conversation. That's slightly, it's too simplistic. I don't think it is. It's a cheap joke. I
don't think it's facetious at all. I don't think that's
it's a little bit. I actually think that's not literally true. But anyway, it has to be. And look, this isn't going to happen in the next year anyway. Yeah. So this is something that's going to have to happen cumulatively. In terms of TikTok, so if we go back to TikTok, right? Yeah. There's a big debate about the Chinese stuff, and remind me to come back to that.
And Trump did want to, to his credit, Trump did want, maybe don't think it's to his credit, but he did want to ban TikTok, and he has explicitly talked about banning TikTok.
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm really glad about is I have written the only books that have ever been endorsed by Tucker Carlson, Hillary Clinton, and Noam Chomsky.
Right.
So I'm in the little sweet spot where, and I don't think that's something about me. It's something about the subjects I write about that all of them, attention problems, depression, addiction, do not fit on these polarized left-right debates, right? At all. When it comes to TikTok, there's lots of things going on there. There's a component of the Chinese, and remind me to come back to that. But the primary thing that's going on is an underlying dynamic that's happening with all social media.
Yeah.
And that we know about partly because a very brave whistleblower, Frances Haugen, leaked Facebook's own internal investigation into this. She's a fucking hero. So the way to explain it is, go back a second to what we were saying 10 minutes or so ago. Every time you open the app and begin to scroll, they make money. The longer you scroll, the more money they make.
Correct.
So the machinery is set up, extremely sophisticated machinery, to monitor everything everyone does on these apps. And that machinery is agnostic about everything except one thing. Did you keep scrolling? It's an incredibly good machinery figuring out what kept people scrolling, right? So all that stuff is set up. They don't care what it is, but they really don't care.
Dogs.
Just Head of KFC, if he could sell you dog, would sell you dog, right? Maybe he wouldn't because there'd be cultural taboos, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Head of KFC doesn't care if he's selling you fried chicken, coleslaw. He doesn't give a shit, right? He just wants you to buy stuff from KFC. In the same way, all they want is for you to keep scrolling. So those algorithms, and to be fair, this was not the intention of anyone, those algorithms bumped into an underlying truth about human psychology, part of human psychology that's been known about for what? Nearly 90 years. It's called negativity bias. It's very simple. Human beings, we will stare longer at things that make us angry and upset than we will at things that make us feel good. If you've ever passed a car crash on the highway, you know exactly what I mean. You stared longer at the car wreck than you did at the pretty flowers on the other side of the street.
I had experience of that. So I just want to, before we go on, I want to linger on something you said.
Sure, please.
So the machinery is agnostic beside profit. Is that also true for TikTok? Like
this is the model that drives TikTok. So this is absolutely the model that drives.
No, so it's not media. Like, okay. So you're saying that TikTok is in the same basket, and the CCP isn't. So
the CCP is. Can we come back to the CCP? Because there's an underlying dynamic that's driving extreme content on all social media, which may be being somewhat dialed up by the CCP. But I think we need to understand the underlying dynamic first.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
If that's okay. And then the CCP thing is really important, but I think it's a secondary order thing, because the reason we know it's a secondary order thing is exactly the same thing is happening with all the ones that are not owned by the CCP, right? So, and controlled by the CCP. So if I explain it, it'll become clearer.
Okay.
So, sorry, I know it's slightly confusing. So machinery is set up to figure out what keeps people scrolling. And the machinery uncovered comes across negativity bias. People will stare longer at things that make them angry and upset than they will at things that make them feel good.
Right.
I'd like to think you find what I'm saying interesting, but if your two tech guys over there started having a fist fight, you would stop listening to me and you would stare at them.
I'd be flabbergasted. Neither one of them can fight. I don't know what they'd be doing.
I would like to watch this, but we'll set this up later. Yeah, I'm excited now, but I'm psyched for that. But
I think they're mortified at my comment, but that's okay.
But that's an example of negativity bias, right? You turn away from the thing you find interesting to the thing that is shocking and angering, right? This is very deep in human nature. 10-week-old babies will stare longer at an angry face than a smiling face, right?
Yeah.
Obvious reasons in our evolution. You want to be vigilant to anger and danger, right? And that's always been some part of our nature. But when it combines with an extraordinarily sophisticated model that learns specifically what angers you, it has catastrophic effects. So let me give you an example. Picture two teenage girls who go to the same party and leave and go home on the same bus.
Okay.
And they both open TikTok. And one of them does a video that says, that was a fucking great party. We danced all night to Ariana Grande. I loved it, right? And the other girl opens TikTok and does a video where she says, Karen was an absolute skank at that party. And her boy, I don't know if teenagers still say skank. I don't think they do. And her boyfriend's a prick. And everyone else at the party was a hoe, right?
Yeah.
The algorithms are constantly scanning for the kind of words that you use, right? And it'll put the first video into some people's feed, but it'll put the second video into far more people's feed. Because if it's enraging, it's engaging. If it activates your anger, it activates negativity bias. You go, what do you mean Karen's a hoe? You're a fucking hoe, right?
Okay. So we're going to need to this is a huge, we're talking about, I want to make sure that we've isolated these variables, and I want to make sure that I truly understand what you're talking about. So I got the whole, I don't know, skank a swear?
Skank, it's...
I know what it means, but is it...
It means like a...
Yeah, I know what it means, but anyway, so...
it's not quite swearing, it's more like dissing.
Yeah. You know what the other word people use here a lot is shag.
Love the word shag, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great word.
Yeah, never hear it unless I'm on the island.
No, I really love it when Americans use the word wank. Like, do you remember when they found that cache of porn in Osama bin Laden's lair?
Oh,
and
yeah.
New York Post headline was Osama bin wank him.
Yeah.
And that was incredibly only the second best New York Post story about headline about masturbation. Do you remember when it was? I can't remember. It was Paul McCartney, I think it was, revealed that the Beatles, when they were teenagers, had all jerked off together, and the New York Post headline was "All come together." Which I thought was genius. But yeah, sorry, go on. There's a tangent, but a great one.
No, that's good. Bloody hell. So, given what, and I just want to make sure that we move slowly as we go on. So, what explains the censorship of anti-woke people on Twitter before Elon bought it, if it's just algorithm?
Oh, that's a different financial mechanism pertaining to advertisers. So you've got two financial motivations. You want to maximize engagement so that people see more ads, and you want to make sure the advertisers are comfortable with what their content appears alongside, right? So if I'm an advertiser for, I don't know, Walgreens, you don't want a Walgreens ad appearing next to, someone saying the Holocaust didn't happen, right? So that's uncomfortable to you. You get public pressure. It alienates your customers, but more importantly, equally alienates your customers and can catalyze people saying, oh, boycott Walgreens, they're supporting Holocaust denial or whatever, right? So they want to maximize our engagement to sell us to the advertisers. They want to make sure the advertisers are happy with what they appear alongside. And there's some friction between those two goals. You're absolutely right. So the maximize engagement is about showing people outraging content. There's even some tension there because if you go too far with that, people actually don't want to open the app, right? You're seeing this with Twitter a lot now. People are like, I don't want to log in and just see images of people being killed in Gaza and, someone being beaten up in Portland. And you can go so far with that negativity bias that actually you make people not want to open it in the first place. So there's layers of friction and tension in these varying incentives. And you're absolutely right that where they were banning, Nazi groups and then in the chain of banning going down to things that are a world away from Nazism, right? That's about the incentive from the advertisers.
So the advertisers are woke and they want to shadow ban, although they didn't call Jack when he went to Congress, was asked about if he shadow banned, he said no, but he lied, although technically he didn't lie because they didn't call it shadow banning. Schellenberger, my good friend Michael Schellenberger talks about this. Taibbi talks about this, et cetera. So then the wokeness of advertisers, you're saying, is responsible. So that's not my understanding of the situation. But
so tell me the different understanding.
Yeah, my understanding of the situation is that the company itself and individuals situated within what's now called X, Twitter, actively, deliberately, purposefully, and intentionally shadow banned or downgraded content from certain providers.
Yeah, I'm sure there were other things going on. I'm sure there were, cultural revolution type stuff happening within.
So it was ideological, in other words.
Yeah, I'm sure that if we think about the layering of incentives, negativity bias to keep people scrolling, but don't do that so much that you don't make people not want to open the app.
Yeah.
Next to that, you've got advertisers who do not want to be pressured, as we're seeing in the last week with Elon Musk having...
media matters.
Exactly. Well, Elon Musk being accused of anti-Semitism and
that was totally insane.
I actually I barely caught the headlines because I've been so busy this week, so I can't really comment on that. But I've just seen the headlines that advertisers are withdrawing because he's been accused of anti-Semitism, and I can't comment on the detail because I don't know anything about it. But so you've got that, And then you'll also have ideological contingents within Twitter, which again, I didn't follow that super closely, but I'm sure there are ideological contingents within Twitter. There were then, and Elon Musk has different ideological motivations, which I'm sure are also driving his decisions. So you've got a panoply of factors that are going on, all of which are in friction with each other to some degree.
And in that hierarchy, you're saying money wins out and the algorithm should just drive the thing that's going to make the most traffic as it relates to, or maybe as it's covariant with the money that advertisers will spend. And now I'm reading into it. You said both in terms of paying more per ad spot and more kind of a broader swath of people interested in advertising.
In a capitalist system, particularly in the absence of regulation, money will almost always win out. Now, that's not always the case. I can't remember the latest valuation, but Elon Musk has tanked the valuation of Twitter.
Right.
So now, I presume if we were talking to him, we know people who know him, but I haven't met him. I don't know if you have.
Yeah.
But we know people who know him, obviously. I assume he would say, the valuation will go back up. But it seems that he doesn't seem that bothered by the fact. So usually in a capitalist system, the machinery will do the thing that maximizes profit, right? Occasionally there will be exceptions, eccentric rich people who decide they're happy to lose money, seems to be, or misjudgment that leads to, which is much more common, obviously. So usually they will try to maximize profit. And in the current configuration of the system, feeding people negative content keeps people scrolling, right? Now, one of the reasons we know this, we know quite how much this has been a driver of the system, is in the wake of the Brexit vote here and the election of President Trump, Facebook set up a group of its own data scientists to figure out, well, did we play any role in this? They went away, they did a report that Francis leaked, and what that Facebook's own data scientists found, and I have no doubt there are people at TikTok and other places that have done the same reports and found the same thing, is that the Facebook algorithm was inherently promoting hatred and rage, right? Inherently doing it. Because if you have a model where a machinery just figures out what keeps you scrolling and humans stare more at things that make them angry, it was just inherently enraging people. In fact, their own data scientists found 1/3 of all the people who had joined neo-Nazi groups in Germany, a country with some experience with Nazism, 1/3 of all the people who joined neo-Nazi groups in Germany joined because Facebook's algorithm had specifically recommended it. You might want to join, it said, followed by a neo-Nazi group, because the algorithm... Now, that's not because anyone at Facebook is a Nazi. Indeed, Mark Zuckerberg's, if his grandparents or great-grandparents fled genocidal anti-Semitism in Europe. It's because the algorithm has picked up, if we link you to things that make you angry, you'll scroll longer. So it's promoting enraging content, right? Now that is having catastrophic, about things we really care about, polarization. Yeah. It is not a coincidence that at the same time as our attention crisis, individual attention crisis, we are having a massive crisis of democracy, the biggest since the 1930s, all over the world. We're speaking on the day that Geert Wilders, a very extreme anti-free speech, far-right individual, has won the election in the Netherlands. I was just in the Netherlands a couple of days ago. I did see it coming. And we're speaking 3 days after the election in Argentina, where again, a very extreme candidate has won, who would not have won in a previous information ecosystem. Again, I've spent a lot of time in Argentina, both countries I love. I'm quite frightened for both those countries. But what we're seeing, and we're seeing it on left and right, I don't think equally weighted, but we are seeing it on left and right. So you think go back to those 2 teenage girls on the bus, right?
Yeah.
The kind girl, the girl who's saying positive, nice things, is muffled, pushed to the back, doesn't get to be heard by many people.
Right.
The angry, mean, hostile girl gets given a megaphone and pushed into loads of people's feeds, right? Now, that's bad enough for 2 teenage girls, as our friend Jonathan Haidt has shown, and people like Professor Jean Twenge in San Diego have shown, who I've also interviewed. This is having catastrophic effects on the anxiety levels of teenage girls. You know, the average teenage girl now has the same level of anxiety that a teenage girl had in the 1950s when she was admitted to a mental institution, right? Really big impacts on anxiety because hostility and meanness are supercharged, right? That's bad enough for them. It's a fucking nightmare when that happens to the whole society, right? When the people who kind of go, you know what, we might disagree, but we're not enemies, and we can probably cut a deal on this. And even if we don't agree, I quite like you, right? The people who say that are fucking muffled, demonized, execrated. And the people who say, you cunts need to be fucking destroyed, and we will not rest until every fucking one of you is destroyed, is absolutely metastasized. And this is already contributed to a genocide in Myanmar or Burma, they're different, same place with different names, depending on your political perspective. In Myanmar, when there was a rise in extreme hatred towards the Rohingya minority, we know, it's been very well documented, including by the UN, that the Facebook algorithms supercharged that hatred, right? Think about the debate that's happening now around Israel-Palestine, which I know we don't want to talk about, quite rightly. But think about the levels of hatred that are being promoted, the lies that are being promoted about Israelis, lies that are being promoted about Palestinians. Again, you see, now, polarization has many causes all over the world. There are many things going on that are causing this. This is not the only one. But when countries as different as Britain, Brazil, and Burma all polarize in similar ways, what are the underlying factors that are shared by Britain, Brazil, and Burma? I can't think of many others, right? There are some.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're all affected to some degree by the nature of the global economy. There are some other things.
Soccer.
But it is overwhelmingly, you know, in those instances, the underlying factor is social media. And we are really deeply seeing this. Think about a comparison, right? When I was a kid, the first political issue I really remember, other than just the existence of Margaret Thatcher, which obviously all British people knew about, was the ozone layer crisis, right?
Oh, yeah.
So for younger viewers who don't know and listeners, it was discovered that hairsprays and fridges contained a chemical called CFCs.
Chlorofluorocarbons.
Yeah, that were causing a hole in the ozone layer, which is what protects us, the Earth from the sun's rays, one of the things. And so there was a big crisis around it. And if we'd carried on using CFCs in the way we were, the ozone layer would have been destroyed and we would have been toast, right? And we loved our hairsprays in the 1980s. So this was a big, big thing, right? You think about what happened. So what happened is scientists discovered this. They explained it to the public. People all over the world absorbed the science. They saw that it was true. They distinguished it from lies and nonsense. And all over the world, people pressured their governments to ban CFCs and fridges, right? Through healthy democratic systems. And everywhere in the world, different countries came at different levels. Democracies did it first because democracies are smarter. Not the individuals in them, obviously, but the system is smarter. And as a result, CFCs were banned, and now the ozone layer is almost completely healed, right? I don't think there's a single person watching or listening who thinks that if the ozone layer crisis had happened now, that's what would happen. You would get some people who would build a whole identity around the ozone layer. They'd wear a little ozone layer sticker. They'd spend their lives gloating about the ozone layer. You get other people who'd say, how do we even know the ozone layer exists? Maybe the hole in the ozone layer was made by George Soros. Maybe Jewish space lasers did. We would just collapse into a kind of banquet of bullshit, and the ozone layer crisis would get worse and worse. So there are many reasons why we need to deal with the factors that are harming our attention. And again, we're focusing on one of the 12, quite rightly, which is the social media component. But there are all these other 11 as well that I write about in Stolen Focus. But there are many reasons why we need to deal with this attention crisis for ourselves, for our work, for our children. Those are the, you know, I write a lot about them. But most of all, from my point of view, because it is not tenable to have a democracy if we cannot communicate, if we are communicating in ways that maximize hatred and rage. You cannot have democracy in that context, as we're seeing from the breakdown of democracy. Can I give you a really trivial example of this polarization? It's a totally fucking trivial one, but it really, it's just one that's really resonated in my mind recently. As you know, I spend a lot of time in Las Vegas because I'm writing a book about a series of crimes that are happening in Vegas.
I thought that was a secret.
I'm allowed to say that, but nothing more.
Okay.
My publishers will taser me if I say any more than that. But So recently, I went to see Barry Manilow in Vegas, right? Because a friend of mine wanted to go.
Well, he's still around?
He's at the Westgate. He's just overtaken Elvis as having the longest continuous.
How was it?
Fucking amazing.
Really?
But for one thing, right? And I'm not a fan of Low. I just thought my friend wanted to go, and I was like, okay. So we go to see Barry Manilow. When would it have been? It would have been maybe a year ago. We could date it because of an event that happened just before it that I'll explain in a minute. But So I didn't think about this in any political context, but if you'd said to me before, can you think of a less political thing than going to see Barry Manilow? I would have said no, right? What could be more apolitical than going to hear someone sing Copacabana, right?
Yeah.
So we go, and this was just after the whole Let's Go Brandon thing. You remember that?
Yeah.
So people who don't remember, I might be getting some of the details wrong, but a NASCAR driver called Brandon was being interviewed on live TV on ESPN or something like it. And the crowd during this live interview was very audibly chanting, "Fuck Joe Biden, fuck Joe Biden, fuck Joe Biden." And it's not clear if the presenter either didn't hear it properly or if she was trying to cover for the swearing. She said, "Oh, they really like you. They're chanting, 'Let's go Brandon,' right?" Just a funny clip. And it went viral. And so it became a right-wing meme saying, "Let's go Brandon," right? So Barry Manilow, for whatever reason, was a little bit late coming out. And someone in the audience starts to chant, "Let's go Brandon." About 10 to 15% of the audience join in the chant. And then they stop and some people clap and someone yells, "Trump 2024. Another person yelled, "Fuck you all." And then they got applause. And I thought, fuck me. We can't fucking listen to Barry Manilow without screaming abuse at each other about politics. This is a bad sign. Now, I'm not saying all of that is due to social media. There's many, many factors going on. But it's a big one, right?
That's kind of crazy.
It's fucking, and it happens as you know, I spend half the year in the US. I'm traveling around the US the whole time. These moments of absolute rage and the inability to hear people are happening. They're definitely happening more and more.
So I want to talk about the inability to listen, but I hate to talk about myself in these, but I do think this is important. That's one of the reasons that Reed and I go around and do the Spectrum Street epistemology is it's increasingly become a way to help people communicate across divides. So have you seen any of those videos? Yeah. We just had dinner with Constantine. We just did one with him and Francis. And, someone will stand on the strongly agree and someone will stand on the strongly disagree. And we have this new thing we do. This is Reed's idea. We have this new thing that we do. We ask people to give the best reason for why they're standing on the line. And then we have one person try to guess what the reason is. And then is that reason better than the one you have? But again, very, very quickly, when I wrote How to Have Impossible Conversations, it was so obvious that we were polarized and not talking to each other. I think that we have the tools. We know that the tools exist, but in one sense, we don't have the will to use them, or we just think that everybody is an existential threat. People who don't think exactly like we do, they're not merely wrong, they're an existential threat. And I will say that I'm a little older than you, maybe a lot. At 57, I can truly tell you, I think one of the biggest problems, perennial problems humans face, exacerbated by social media, is the inability to listen, right? We don't really, Rappaport's first rule, you should be able to repeat back to someone what they said in a way better than they could. But social media, Twitter in particular, I think the architecture of the platform determines the kind of, I don't know, it rewards certain acerbic comments or certain caustic, bitter, toxic. But with Twitter, you're always rewarded for the slam or the kind of the grab headline. But to try to teach people to communicate across divides or have sound epistemology, that's not really rewarded. We wanted to do the Spectrum Street epistemology with you today, but it's just too cold outside to do it. We don't want to do it in here, but I want to go back to this idea of listening, because social media doesn't promote. I mean, I think after it could have been pre-Elon, and again, I'm not even on any other things. I've never even barely ever even looked at Instagram. I think I have an Instagram page, but I never look at it. But the inability to listen and the incentivization structure for saying, fuck you, or, you piece of, dog meat, and then everybody else kind of jumps on the bandwagon. And it's like, oh, this is fantastic. That is so corrosive to the idea to the disposition to want to listen to someone to understand what they have to say. And it also is embedded within that is a kind of hubris that that you hold the right moral positions and everybody else is a moron. I mean, that to me seems like we're not talking about that. And that, to me personally, and maybe this is just my pet peeve, or I don't know, high horse isn't the right thing. Maybe it's just my lens. That's one of the most toxic things, because it causes schisms and polarization, because people don't even understand what other people believe, because they're too ready to pile on. And I started to say, sometimes if you like something, it will say, don't you want to read the article? Like, I just read the article on a web page and I went to like it on someone, and I remember getting this thing and I'm like, wow, that's kind of good. But even then you have this idea embedded within it, like, oh, I like the title, I click on it. I don't have to read it. I don't have to listen to it. And then and I'm even guilty of this, because I follow people who believe similar things to what I believe, as opposed to, I didn't always do this, but as opposed to people who believe different things. So I'm never really learning why they believe what they believe. Like, I don't have a solid epistemological grounding in what they believe. Does that make sense?
No, I think you put that really profoundly and brilliantly, because I think, obviously, in this conversation, we've been talking about the negative effects for the society of being immersed in this. But what you're getting at is a really important thing, which is the negative effect for the individual.
Yeah,
right?
I have very few people actually drill down and talk about that.
Well, for me, like, the worst possible way to approach difference is in an angry, hostile frame of mind.
Yeah.
One of the great gifts of being a human being is that you are surrounded by people who are different to you in infinitely fascinating ways, right? And what you're describing, a machinery, this is largely due to the algorithms, although I agree there's to some element, I think it's inherent partly to the architecture of Twitter itself, although the algorithms supercharge it. It militates against, to me, all the best things in life: curiosity, compassion, doubt. Graham Greene, one of my favorite writers, said, when we doubt, we are alive, right? And one of the things I can't bear about Twitter is, and one of the reasons you can't bear it, is when I look at people that I really like and admire on Twitter, who I know to be clever and I know to be interesting and thoughtful people. On Twitter, it's this constant performance of exasperated confident certainty and scorn for other people.
Absolutely.
As an academic at Harvard, I'm blanking on her name, who I interviewed, who does really interesting work on dignity violations. There's no respect for other people's dignity. I always think the most beautiful line in any constitution, in any country in the world, is not the American Constitution, although I like the American Constitution in many ways. It's the first line of the German post-war Constitution. Human dignity shall not be violated, right? That you treat people as having inherent dignity. Doesn't mean you agree with them. Part of being dignified is that you disagree a lot of the time, but that you treat people with dignity. And this nihilistic scorn that is promoted, quite apart from being bad for the society, it's obviously bad for the society. But I'll give you an example. I'm not going to name the individual, but there's someone I know who's a very well-known British public figure who I met, 20 years ago. Funny enough, actually, by funny coincidence, on this street, I met him. The street where we are now. Who was a extremely nice, thoughtful, clever...
I think I know who you're going to say.
I won't name the person. Partly because I actually have a lot of sympathy for this person, and I suspected I remained in that information ecosystem, exactly the same thing would happen to me, so I don't say there's any superiority, who wrote a really clever, thoughtful, well-written book. This individual is... like me, quite left-wing. He's to the left of me, but left-wing. But wrote a book you could give to any ordinary person and they would engage with it. They wouldn't necessarily agree, but they engaged with it. It was thoughtful and rich. And that person then entered this machinery and has become more and more driven by rage and bitterness and hatred. And I don't think this is a character flaw in him. I really don't. I think this is the product of the machinery. Well, let me give you an even better example of someone I can name. Someone from a different part of the political spectrum I met around the same time, Milo Yiannopoulos, right? Yeah. So I first met Milo, I don't think it was as long as 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, right? Now, look, I never liked Milo, right? He's not my kind of person. But when I met him, he was a kind of centre-right person. And to be honest, I always thought politically he was a bit like a drag queen, right? I'm gay, so I can say that without sounding homophobic. Like, he was just saying provocative, silly things, right? Me and Milo both love Joan Rivers. It's the one thing we bonded over and agreed on. When we met, we would talk about Joan Rivers. But he actually doesn't remember whether we met first time, but I met him many years later. Anyway, Milo wrote a really interesting article
Oh, he's not evidently not, he's not gay anymore. But
Oh, right, okay, an
but
ex-gay.
please going.
Believe me, he's probably being fucked up the ass while we speak. But whatever. He's not gay. But he wrote a really interesting article around the time that I met him, which I remember talking to him about, praising him for. And years later, when I met him, I talked to him about this. It was called something like "The Internet is Making Us All Psychopaths." I recommend people look it up. I presume it's still online. And what he said was, this is when he was a kind of centre-right person. He said, all the incentives in this machinery are to be the worst version of yourself.
Yeah.
Right? This is what's happened to the left-wing guy I mentioned about. It's what happened to Milo. I'm not comparing the left-wing guy to Milo because I think Milo's much worse. But it's not fair to compare them. But in this limited sense, I would compare them. And if you read that article, I haven't read it in a long time, this is from memory, he prophesizes exactly what happened to him. Right? He said, I am rewarded for being mean. I'm paraphrasing, I haven't read it in many years. I'm rewarded for being mean. I'm rewarded for being hostile. The internet is making us all psychopaths, right? Now, I would narrow it and say the current algorithmic system is making us all. But then it was like, and then obviously I didn't see Milo for many years. He went off to incite riots in Berkeley or whatever he did and became more and more grotesque, I would argue, and vile. And I interviewed him for Stolen Focus. I didn't use it in the end for various reasons in the book. But I went to meet up with him and he was living in New Jersey and interviewed him. And he would give his own account of our conversation. But I was asking him about that really good article he wrote, right? And what was interesting from my perspective, and I'm sure he would think of it differently, and well, I know he thinks of it differently because he disagreed with me, was from my perspective, he had been profoundly corrupted by the incentives of this system. Now, I don't want to remove moral responsibility from him. Most people operate in those incentives and they don't, do really cruel and mean and nasty things like he did. So I'm not removing his moral responsibility. It's some combination of the incentives and, I would argue, moral failings in his character, and the financial incentives that he was, all sorts of things going on. But what's interesting is he didn't renounce the article, but he just said, no, I would have done this anyway, right? And what to me it felt like is, wow, these algorithms have so polluted his character that he can't even see what they've done to him. That the algorithms made him dance to a tune, and he just says, but I would have chosen that tune all on my own, right?
Yeah, that's exactly when I was on Tim Pool's show, that's exactly what Tim was telling Reed and I. I'm curious, people we know, I'm just trying to think if I should say this person's name. I won't say this person's name. People we know on the island are susceptible to this. Everybody's susceptible to this.
All humans are susceptible to it.
But I think that
including you and me, by the way.
Yeah, of course. I think that there's something about overestimating or miscalibrating the sincerity of people that works both ways. Both people who pay you compliments and people who are like, oh, you idiot, you retard, you fool, what am I getting? Three I probably get most, although I don't get them much anymore. I used to get constantly. Moron, Nazi, and grifter. I'm a moron, I'm a Nazi, and I'm a grifter. And I think that the tendency is to take, it's like some random guy, like what did Trump say in the debate? It's probably some 400-pound guy in his basement, I think was the line. I don't know if you remember that. But I think that we overestimate people's sincerity. Isn't the expression like to take the piss out of someone is to just like fuck around with them? Like,
yeah.
So I think that we're calibrated for that for real life interactions to a certain sense, and we miscalibrate. In fact, we skew it to one side. Do you think that plays any role in it? It's kind of like, in one sense, it's kind of a trolling, but in another sense, it's just people simply aren't as sincere in their compliments and their invectives.
I would put it slightly differently. I think there's definitely truth in what you're saying. I'll put it slightly differently. If you're sitting in a group of people you've never met, the incentives in the main are to connect, to understand each other socially, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that gives me great hope is juries, right? I thought about this when I read your excellent book about impossible, difficult conversations.
Oh, thank you.
Juries work really well, right? I've been doing reporting in Vegas on juries. Juries reach really good decisions. Yeah. 12 random people, put them together, and there's really interesting research about why that is. There's excellent French social scientists called Sperber and Mercier who've done really good work on this. I've interviewed them in Paris for something I'm going to write at some point. So why are juries really good at assessing evidence in the main? It's because people agree on the purpose of why they're there. Almost everyone thinks it's a bad thing if a murderer gets away with it, and it's a bad thing if an innocent man goes to prison for murder, right? Almost everyone, almost no exceptions, right? So juries take it really seriously, right? We agree on our goal. So what Sperry and Mercier argue is that human beings are very good at using reason when they have agreed a goal, right? Reason is, in the absence of an agreed goal, reason doesn't work at all. If you and me don't agree on, I don't know, Biden and Trump, right? I can use reason to try to persuade you. You can use it doesn't matter. We don't have a shared goal, right? We fundamentally don't agree. Now, actually, in many spheres of our life, people polarized around that would agree, but set that aside. In the context of arguing about that subject, we would struggle to have any meaningful agreement. So reason untethered from a shared common purpose doesn't work. Reason in the context of a common purpose does work. I'm slightly oversimplifying their work, but that is the gist of it, right? So part of it is that promoting this tribalization, if I think about what I really don't like, I haven't looked at it in a long time, but what I really don't like when I look at Twitter is some of what you're saying that, there are some people who can just absorb abuse, right? Either they have had very secure lives and very secure
childhood. My writing partner is one of those people. James Lindsay can just absorb insane amounts of abuse.
Right. Some people can just soak that up. There's a British figure who I know and like called Ben Goldacre, whose work you might do. He's probably the individual I know who most...
A great TED Talk,
Yeah, Ben is someone who can just soak up enormous amounts of abuse and it just doesn't seem to touch him, right? We're not that kind of person. Right? I know you well enough to know you are not that kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. We're the kind of... I suspect you're like me. If I get... I was going to say something, I'll qualify it, but I was going to say, if I get 100 nice comments and one negative comment, it's the negative comment that will stick in my mind. But actually, it goes back to something you were saying before, which I think is really important. I actually think praise is as corrupting as abuse. Because for lots of reasons, what should propel you in your work is a sense of meaning and connection to the things you are doing, right? Why am I doing this thing about Las Vegas? Because I believe that these people who were murdered really matter. And it matters what happened to them. And it matters that someone documents it. And the story of what happened there is extraordinary and people need to know about it. Why am I writing a biography of Noam Chomsky, which I've been working on for 1,000 years and I'll probably be older than Noam is now by the time I finish, but because I believe his life is really important. I think he did extraordinary, complex things. And it is of value to connect with that and understand it deeply, right? Why did I do my book about the war on drugs? Because this is something that's really important to me, right? When I'm centered on the meaning of what I do, I may not feel good, but I feel centered. I will often feel good, but I feel centered and purposeful and it propels me forward. If I get out of that zone and I go, think about my book about the war on drugs, right? If I think, okay, I wrote this book, Chasing the Scream. I traveled all over the world. It's about the war on drugs. Why do we have a war on drugs? What can we do? What happens when you legalize drugs?
I've probably recommended that book to 100 people.
Oh, thank you. I remember we talked about it a lot when we first met. And so I can think about that book in three ways. I could say that book got loads of praise. It got made into an Oscar-nominated film. Samuel L. Jackson made an 8-part TV series out of it. You'd think that'd go, and that makes me feel really good. And I could also think about the criticisms, and some people were mean about it. Actually, not that many with that book, but actually that doesn't. There's a buzzy happiness to that.
Yeah.
But actually, when it's meaningful, you go, no, actually, I went and met Chino Hardin, who's a trans crack dealer in Brooklyn, who, was conceived when his mother, who was addicted to crack, was raped by his dad, who was an NYPD officer. And I told Chino's story. Chino is one of the most impressive people I've ever met. That is inherently meaningful. And if no one had ever praised my book, it would still be inherently meaningful. And when I'm in that zone, so, and there's lots of research on this. I write about this in my book about depression, lost connections. It's an amazing man named Professor Tim Kasser who's done loads of research on this. When you are focused on the inherent value and meaning of your work, again, I'm oversimplifying, but it's the truth. This is basically what he says among his findings. You feel good. And when you're focused on the extrinsic stuff, it might make you feel good for a short while, but you're allowing anxiety in. So And Twitter is all extrinsic, right?
yeah.
You're constantly thinking, how many people retweeted that? How many people retweeted that?
yeah.
Who's calling me a cunt today, right? Sorry, I have a British attitude to the word cunt, by the way, for which I apologize to all Americans watching. My mother is Scottish, so if you said to my mother, how do you get to the post office from here? She'd go, so you go at this building, go down a few streets, you'll see a bunch of cunts standing there, go right where they are, you'll see another bunch of cunts, that's the post office. So it's I apologize to everyone who thinks I'm saying a terrible thing. I'm not. In my context, I'm not. But yeah, so I don't, the dominant, I think it's really thinking about the dominant tone on Twitter as well, which is sarcastic certainty and exasperation. I've been thinking about exasperation recently, because exasperation is, to me, there are sometimes situations in life where you have to be exasperated. Of course, it's part of the palette of human emotion for a reason. But it's a terrible state to be trying to induce in other people. Exasperation is going, things are shit and there's nothing we can do about it, right? That to me is the antithesis of what I ever want to make people feel. Sometimes things are shit, but there's almost always something we can do about it, right? And to me, it breeds a kind of nihilistic despair. And one of the reasons is, and this comes back to the whole wider attention debate, what do you lose when you can't pay attention? The biggest thing you lose is depth. You can't think deeply. It is impossible to express deep thought on Twitter. There are sometimes...
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. Sorry to interrupt you. Add to that. Not only is it impossible to express deep thought, there is a very, very heavy price that is exacted for wondering. When you wonder aloud, when you ask a question, people, I just cannot believe the vituperation, the nastiness. I mean, I just the savage attack. So it's really Twitter is the place where wonder goes to die.
Well, there's no space for open-mindedness, right?
Yeah.
And this fits with the political movements it gives. It supercharges.
Yeah.
If you know everything already, if all life is just a series of 5 moral certainties, and the only problem is that we haven't aggressively shamed and bullied the rest of the world into believing these 5 moral certainties. So and that's true, by the way, of many left and right political movements. You know, I'm not singling out one side, but and I don't think they're morally equivalent for reasons I can talk about. But I think if there's no space for curiosity, or if you try to express curiosity, you will be brutally slapped down.
The same mechanism is operative within YouTube. For example, I had a really wonderful conversation with Paul Vanderklay, who's an American pastor, and somebody here, Alexander. We talked about drugs and mushrooms and just some really good conversations haven't taken off. But when there's conflict or people freaking out at each other or yelling at each other, those videos do extraordinarily well.
Well, again, that comes back to the algorithms. If you look at, there's a website that I name in the book, I'm blanking on the name of it now. I think it's called Algo Watch, but I might be misremembering it, that looks at what are the words that most, and this again comes back to the attention economy, what are the words that are most shared videos and viewed videos on YouTube, what were the words in their title? They were obliterates, destroys, hates, go down the list, right there. Absolutely annihilatory negative words. Look, you cannot have a peaceful democratic society if what is absolutely prioritized all the time is the idea of hating and obliterating other people.
Right.
It's a crazy way to live your life anyway. In my view, no one needs to be hated. Some people need to be stopped. No one needs to be hated. I've interviewed some of the people who've done some of the worst things you can imagine. I've interviewed, a hitman for the deadliest Mexican drug cartel who butchered or beheaded 70 people. I've interviewed warlords in the Congo who whipped up armies of child soldiers, right? I've interviewed people who caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. None of them were evil. They've done really, really bad things, but they've done bad things in a context where you or I, if we'd had their lives, would have done bad things. And if you approach people in a spirit of curiosity, you can grow and learn. If you approach people in a spirit of certainty and anger, and by the way, I had periods in my life where I'm not holding myself above this. I had periods in my own life where when I was immersed in this kind of social media machinery, where I was much closer to Milo or the person I'm not going to name than I was to, I don't mean politically, but in that rage. There's this great phrase, was actually coined by sociologists to describe people during the Rwandan genocide or the run-up to the Rwandan genocide, but it has much wider application. A conflict entrepreneur. Have you heard this concept, right? So you're seeing in these incentive systems, we all become conflict entrepreneurs to some degree. Now you get Milo, to me, was almost a pure conflict entrepreneur. I don't think he really believes any of the things he said. I think he certainly does not believe he's no longer gay. I mean, he's no longer gay. But it's a societally disastrous infrastructure, and it is a personally disastrous infrastructure. It is spiritually destructive. It's intellectually destructive. It's as you see from the fact that the very cleverest people are, and the very kindest people are dumb and mean after they've been on it for a while.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We have to wrap up, but a couple of things. This was fascinating. I mean, genuinely interesting. I'd love to have you back in January because we haven't talked about drugs.
I'll actually be in Jamaica for January.
We haven't talked about drugs.
We can talk drugs anytime.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that and the legality, the solutions. I find your work on attention to be, quite frankly, disturbing because I see it in myself. And when I see it in myself, I know, like, I pick up my phone. So just real quick, so I play a couple of games on my phone. Like, I love zombies. And so before I go to bed, I play the zombie game. And I love tower defense games. And I just find it like, I know that it's bad sleep hygiene. And I know that it's a total waste of my time. But before I go to bed, I just play and I just shut my brain off. My brain just goes off. And then I just, so I would love to be able to get to sleep without doing that because I certainly did for 50 years.
But it's working for you, right? Why would you want to, it sounds like it's not incurring a big cost and it's.
Well, I don't think it's a cost I don't want to pay. And I do.
How long do you play it for?
20 minutes.
Doesn't sound to me so bad.
Yeah, but I do find that, like, sometimes when my phone is dead and once my charger was out, my phone, I did I did, and then I knew it's kind of like if I don't have my morning coffee.
Right.
But it's interesting, I'm not trying to quit my morning coffee, but I am trying to quit these little bad, particularly if they're time. Maybe it's because I hierarchically prioritize my time and I can drink coffee while I'm, emailing or doing whatever the hell it is that I'm doing.
Self-chastisement is not a good tool for change. What you want to do is identify what need is being met by playing the video game.
Mind off.
And right, well then I would recommend trying alternative techniques, meditation, listening to calming music, if you want to expect, just saying, you asshole, stop doing this, very rarely works, right? You use the negative emotion to then say, okay, well, what need is this meeting? How can I do this in some other way? So I would say try meditation, try other modes of relaxing.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things you can do before you go to sleep that help you to switch your brain off that are not this video game. But I think, look, we all feel it, right? In terms of the wider it bearing on us, sometimes people say to me, oh, so have you solved this problem for yourself then? Go,
yeah, right.
Of course I fucking haven't. I still live in the same world as everyone else, right? Now, having learned everything I learned for Stolen Focus, am I better equipped to deal with these problems? Absolutely. And we focused on one of the 12 causes, but there's the whole other 11, for which people will have to read the book. Very good. Where I talk about it. But, so there's many other things going on that I've had to deal with in my own life and that we need to deal with societally. But one of the most important psychological shifts we have to make is to stop blaming ourselves, right? At the moment, our primary response to the attention crisis is to be angry with ourselves and angry with our children.
100%.
Think about my godson. I'd look and go, what the fuck is wrong with you, right?
Right.
But we need to stop being angry with ourselves and start being angry with the people who did this to us, right? And you've got to understand we're in a race. At the moment, you've got all these 12 factors that are undermining our attention, many of which are going to become stronger if we let them.
Yeah.
Paul Graham, one of the biggest investors in Silicon
love
Valley.
Paul.
A fascinating guy. He says, the world is going to be more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is than Facebook, right?
Yeah.
That's one side of the race. On the other side of the race, there's got to be a movement of all of us saying, fuck no, you don't get to do that to me. You don't get to do that to my brain. You don't get to do that to my children. Of course, we choose a life with lots of technology.
Yeah.
Technology is great. But we choose a life where we can think deeply, where we can read books, where our kids can play outside. Now, if we want that, the evidence is very clear about how to get it and the steps we have to take. And like I say, I went to countries that have begun to do it. France, New Zealand, all sorts of places. I report from them in the book. But it requires a shift in psychology. We have to realize that we are not medieval peasants begging at the table of King Musk and King Zuckerberg for a few shitty crumbs of attention from their table. We are the free citizens of democracies, endangered democracies, and we own our own minds. And together, if we want to, we can take them back. But we've got to understand what's happening to us in a much deeper way than I've got bad habits, right?
What a great way to end. Thank you so much. Johann
cheers,
Hari.
Peter.
Appreciate it, my friend. Appreciate it.
Oh, joyful.
Where can people find you?
Oh, yeah, I'm always meant to say, my publishers always tase me if I forget to say this. If you want to know about the book we've been talking about, it's stolenfocusbook.com. It's an audiobook, ebook, physical book. Or they can go for my other books to johannhari.com, where they can watch my TED Talks and my other books, and they can watch the movies,
It's fantastic.
and TV series. And
I can't recommend it enough. And I think Reed and I will be back in April.
Hooray!
And I'd love to do a deep dive with you on drugs and homelessness.
We will do drugs in April. I
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All right.
Cheers. What a pleasure.
Thank you for watching. Everything we do is under the umbrella of the National Progress Alliance, nationalprogressalliance.org. It's a nonprofit, independent 501c3. Your generous donations keep us going and keep fueling content like this. So please help us out. Make a donation. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.